We're going to work on the flat-felled seam. A flat-felled seam is a completely enclosed seam, face side and wrong side. You often see these seam types on heavy-duty garments. So we need the two pattern pieces. So make sure that you've got the two pattern pieces that say flat-felled seam left and flat-felled seam right. This denotes that there's going to be a left and a right side. We could also note them as a front and a back. But we're going to cut one of each of those. And notice that the notches that are here are actually two different widths from our cut edge. That's so when we sew these together, put these notches together, and I'll just show you really quickly if I can line up these notches. One of the patterns is actually longer than the other. And what's going to happen is we're going to fold that edge over the other side and then stitch it down. So we've got our two pattern pieces. We just need to cut them out. So I've got my fabric here. I'm going to lay this out single layer. I have a cut edge here. I don't have a selvage, so I'm going to pull. I've got stretch, and then I'll pull here. I don't have stretch, so this is my straight grain. So I'm going to lay my patterns out. Now I want to conserve fabric, and I want to be laying things out similarly to what they do in the industry. So I want to butt these up together, but I'm going to trace them individually. So I've got this one lined up here, right, going on the straight grain, and I'm coming away a little bit from my cut edge and from my ripped edge. So I'll weight this down, and I'm going to trace this piece. And don't forget to mark where your notches are. I can remove this piece, and I'm going to take my other piece and I'm going to line it right up here, right on that previous line that I drew. And I'll go ahead and weight it to hold it in place. Mark my notches. And now I can cut this out. Okay, now that I have the perimeters of my pieces cut, remember I need to cut where the pattern I had laid the patterns on. Right? This is my cut edge, so I need to separate the two pieces. Okay, so now that they're separated, now I'm going to mark for my face side of the fabric. Here's my marking pen. All right, so this is the face side. Now, a flat-felled seam is constructed completely on the face side. And we want to make sure that we clip our notches, because when we line up the two pieces, we're going to be lining them up wrong side together, and we're going to be matching those notches. So what I'm going to do, I'll find out my two notches here, I'll match that, and I'm just going to put a pin right here at the bottom, and then I'm going to find my two notches here. Those are matched, and I'll put a pin right up here at the top. And this should hopefully lay in a straight line, and I could put a pin in the middle. Now, this may be a little tricky at first, but what we're going to be doing is that we're actually going to be sewing from notch to notch. So we should be able to do it by eye, but those of you who need a little bit of help, you can line up your ruler, notch to notch, and then go ahead and draw a line. Now, after a while, you want to be able to do this without drawing a line. So maybe do one with drawing the line and do a second without the line. So this will be our first step. Now we're ready to go to the machine. Okay, I'm ready to sew this flat felled seam, and it's a little bit different than the other seams. Everything that's done with the flat felled seam is actually done on the face side of the fabric. So if you notice, I have it pinned here with wrong sides together. And I actually have it pinned together, and you'll notice, as mentioned before, one of the sides is actually longer than the other side. So what's going to happen is we're going to end up turning this over and then turning it again to completely enclose that, and that will take some pressing and additional stitching. So I have matched my fabrics, both of them, here at the notch, and we're going to sew this seam straight from notch all the way down to the notch. So there's no real seam allowance guide that we can follow. So because it's actually in the middle. So we're actually going to be sewing from notch all the way down to the other notch. And I've driven a guideline. If that will help you in the beginning, perhaps try one with a guideline and then try one without. But what we want to do is we want to make sure that from this first cut edge to this line is actually even all the way down. We're going to start actually with a back stitch at the top. So again, I must lift my presser foot, push the fabric up just past the needle again, and I can lower the needle into the fabric. I like to start it that way. And then I'm going to pull this first needle out, pin out, because we don't want to sew on that. And we'll just follow this line. I'm going to back stitch first. Just follow that line. Coming up to my second pin, I'll pull that out and I can continue sewing. And I'm going to stop here for just 1 second, pull this pin out, and then I'm coming up here, so I'm going to get ready to backstitch. And I'll backstitch. Make sure that needle is all the way up. Presser foot up, and then you can remove your fabric. I'm going to clip my threads at both ends. Okay, so now I have this seam that is very even all the way down to the bottom. And now we're going to be ready for the next step, which is pressing this longer part over. So let's go over to the pressing mat. Okay, so now we're ready to press for the flat felled to prepare for the top stitching. And remember, this is our face side. We've been working on the entire face side the entire time. And what we actually are going to want to do, if you look at it so you unfold it this way so you see both of the face sides, what we really want to do is we want to take this extra width and we want to fold it over that seam allowance, and then we want to turn it over again. So the way I like to do this, I'm going to first give a quick press. And then what I like to do is I like to take this edge before I open it up. Take this edge, and with your fold of this edge being flush with the cut edge of the shorter seam allowance, fold that over, and it should pretty much match where your stitch line is. So I like to press it over because I like to have a nice clean pressed edge for when I do the next step. Okay, so now that I've got this pressed, I'm actually going to open this up so I can see both sides of the face side. And I want to make sure that this is actually kind of taut on this side, because you see how I've got this nice folded edge over. I'm actually going to fold that over onto the other side. Right? I want to make sure that it's snug. Make sure that you're not folding it over too far and you get this lip on the other side. You want to make sure that this seam is really flush when you fold it over. So I'll fold this over. And we'll just look at the seam. We've got a nice flush seam there. And I'm going to press this down. Now that's nice and flat. And I'm going to turn it over real quick so you can see. This side is nice and flush. There's no extra lip here. That's what we want. So just to keep everything in place, I'm actually going to pin this down. Just so it stays in place before I get to the machine. Okay, so again, this is our face side. I'm going to top stitch right here just at the edge of the folded part of this seam, and that will give me 2 stitch lines on the outside, and for the wrong side it will give me 1 stitch line. So let's go ahead and go to the machine. Okay, so we're ready to do the finishing stitching on our flat felled seam, and I have it nicely pinned here, folded over. Let me remove this top pin and just remind you what we're doing. So what we've done is we've had our seam allowances here, and one of them is longer. We sewed between the notches, and then we pressed the extra fabric over that seam allowance and then turned it over once more to actually enclose that on the face side of the fabric. And then I pinned it, and what we're going to do is we're going to sew right here on the edge, maybe just a shy of a 1/16 away from that folded edge. But understand, when we stitch on this, we want to make sure that our stitching is equal distance from the previous stitching. So don't start out here and then come in here, because during assessment we're going to find all of those little errors, and we're going to need to go back and correct them. So we're going to need to stitch a straight line, keeping it equal distance from our original stitch line. So let's go ahead and top stitch this down. So put this under the presser foot, get it up to the width that you want, about maybe a 1/16 away from that folded edge. Needle down, and I'm going to start off with the back stitch. And then just keep an eye on where your stitching is and in relationship to the other stitch line. Remove your pins as you go. Coming up close to the end, so I'm going to get ready to backstitch. And there we go. Clip our threads. And there is the finished flat felled seam. And this is the face side. And if we turn it over to the other side, the wrong side, you can see, as I mentioned before, there's just 1 row of stitching on the wrong side, and I have 2 rows of stitching on the face side. So let's go to the pressing mat and give this one final press before assessment.